the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is two new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Good morning, it's 9:30 on Monday the 16th of October. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with me, Bev Turner, and Emily Carver this morning. So, mixed reports of a possible ceasefire as we go on air this morning.
Rafah will be open. We're putting in place with the United Nations, with Egypt, with Israel, with others, the mechanism by which to get the assistance in.
Anthony Blinken there saying the Gaza-Egypt crossing could reopen to help those fleeing the war, but Hamas says that nothing has been agreed, as has Israel's military.
Prime Minister Rishi Sunak will address the House of Commons later to set out the UK's response to the escalating conflict.
No glorifying terrorism. Home Secretary Suella Braverman warns that police will pursue anyone mocking the murder of Jews. At least 15 people were arrested at protests over the weekend.
And a surge in spiking. There's been a nearly 200% increase in drink spiking in Lancashire. And our reporter has been on patrol with the local police force. We'll bring you that exclusive and quite scary report. And we will be going to Charlie Peters over in Israel throughout the show this morning to bring you the very latest. Mark White, our home security editor, is also back, and he'll be joining us in the studio soon also. Let us know your thoughts this morning. gbviews@gbnews.com is the email address. First, though, here is your very latest news with Tamsin Roberts.
Bev, thanks very much, and good morning from the GB Newsroom at 9:31. The Prime Minister will address the escalating crisis in the Middle East, along with the UK's response to the violence, as MPs return to Westminster. Well, these are live pictures from Sderot in Israel, looking towards northern Gaza, where the United Nations is warning the humanitarian situation is deteriorating quickly. Israel has ordered civilians to evacuate the area ahead of a major offensive targeting Hamas in response to an attack which claimed 1,300 lives. Gaza's health ministry says 2,750 Palestinians have been killed since the 7th of October and 9,700 people wounded by Israeli airstrikes. Well, these are live pictures of the Egyptian-controlled Rafah crossing on the border with Gaza, where people are gathering outside closed gates. Earlier, fuel tankers were seen in the area, escorted by vehicles carrying the United Nations flag. There are also conflicting reports about a ceasefire. Egyptian security sources suggested it had been agreed between the US, Israel and Egypt to allow the safe passage of humanitarian aid, but a statement from Israel's Prime Minister said there is currently no truce. Well, Israel's military continues to amass outside Gaza, preparing for a ground offensive. The country's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, has vowed to demolish Hamas. The US President Joe Biden says he's confident Israel will act under the rules of war and that he believes Hamas must be eliminated. But in an interview added there must be a path to a Palestinian state. Well, it's believed around 10 British nationals are among those being held hostage by Hamas. Armed Forces Minister James Heappey says the government is working to help people out of the conflict zone.
We are planning and executing the evacuation of British citizens from the region should they wish to leave. There are opportunities to do that both from Tel Aviv, where a number of flights have now departed, but also we hope later today through the Rafah crossing on the border between Gaza and Egypt as well.
To other news now, experts believe net migration to the UK is unlikely to drop below 250,000 a year by the end of the decade. Net migration stood at 606,000 last year, with the war in Ukraine and arrivals from Hong Kong contributing to the numbers. The Migration Observatory at the University of Oxford and the London School of Economics say going forward the figure will largely be driven by international students. Well, those are the top stories, and you can, of course, get more on all of those by visiting our website, gbnews.com. Now, though, it's back to Bev and Emily.
Very good morning. It's 9:34. It's me and Emily this morning. So both the Israeli Prime Minister and Hamas have denied reports of a potential ceasefire in southern Gaza to coincide with the reopening of the Rafah border crossing.
Yes, so US media reports say Egypt will open its border crossing to Gaza shortly. That's to allow Palestinians with dual nationality out and much-needed aid in.
Officials have not confirmed this, but US nationals in Gaza have been told to move closer to the Rafah crossing.
Yes, now nearly 2,700 people have been killed by Israel's bombing of Gaza since the attacks, with an estimated 1,000 missing under rubble.
Our reporter, Tom Sullivan, reports on the crisis inside Gaza, a warning that you may find some of this content disturbing.
Northern Gaza has fallen eerily silent after another night of deadly bombing. Now the only thing falling from the sky are thousands of pamphlets containing a message from Israel: evacuate to the south immediately. And so they did. For many, the threat of more of Israel's bombs and impending invasion in response to the terror attack which killed more than 1,400 in Israel outweighs orders from Hamas to stay put. Hundreds of thousands fled south on whatever could carry them. Cars if there was fuel, horse and cart if one could be found, but many turned to their own feet. But not everyone is leaving. This doctor and his staff at this children's hospital say they simply can't evacuate.
If you want to kill us while we continue working here. We will not leave.
We need days and weeks to secure another place. Unfortunately, there are no empty nurseries in these difficult conditions. The situation is really dangerous. I tell you that transferring these children from this place means handing them a death sentence. They will die, and this equipment only operates with electricity and oxygen.
Nearby, Al-Shifa Hospital continues to receive a flow of bodies pulled from the rubble of bombed neighbourhoods. Doctors here say the hospital is overwhelmed with civilians, the injured and the orphaned. Where do these children go now? Foreign nationals have been told to head to Gaza's border with Egypt, but as they arrive there was no escape. Here, those with European and American passports can only wait for the gates to be opened. Among them, Mariam and her mother, who travelled from their home in the UK to Gaza to visit family.
Every time I just have to have the thought of me dying in a bomb in Gaza, like it's not a good thing. And like every place I go run away, and I just find bombs and I find dead people, and like maybe one day I'll end up like them, but it's a really scary thing for me.
Israel has overwhelming support by the EU, the UK and the United States over its right to defend itself and eliminate Hamas, a terror group that has inflicted unimaginable suffering and bloodshed on the country. But such messages of support have increasingly come with a warning to retaliate within international law and to protect innocent Palestinian civilians.
We're joined now by Charlie Peters, live from Tel Aviv. Good morning, Charlie. What do we know of the fate of people trying to leave Gaza this morning?
Well, they're not being allowed to. That's the bottom line up front. There have been reports of a potential opening at the Rafah crossing for the last 48 hours, but both times that's been mooted in the press via American diplomacy. It has not come to fruition. And that is the same situation that is happening this morning. Foreign nationals, in particular those with British and American passports, have been urged to head down to that Rafah crossing. There are some 60,000 Britons in Israel and the Palestinian territories, many of them in Gaza. But so far, no one has been allowed to exit. But at the same time, we have seen this morning some fuel trucks crossing at the Rafah crossing there between Egypt and Gaza. They appear to be UN flagged, highly likely carrying fuel that generators need in southern Gaza in order to power hospital gear and other medical equipment, and also just to sustain the general humanitarian situation there. It has been under heavy blockade by Israel since this war started 9 days ago, preventing electricity and water supplies. And that has been a consistent issue for those in Gaza. They have been given stories of hope that some more opportunities and offers of aid may come, and then that hope is taken away. Yesterday, the energy minister in Israel said that through American diplomacy and with the Egyptians, they had agreed to reopen the water supplies in southern Gaza. But 6 hours later, the taps were still dry, and we've had no further update. But the Israelis need people to go to southern Gaza, and in order to do that, they need to give them an opportunity to stay alive. They need a humanitarian situation in the south, because if they don't, fewer people will make that journey from the north to the south, as they have been ordered by the IDF through UN liaison officers. Last night, the IDF said that some 600,000 people had made that journey down. That's 1.1 million people estimated to be in North Gaza, so still a significant population remaining. And while they are still there, the IDF cannot continue with the severe bombardment that it has launched, and it cannot also extend it into using more advanced munitions. It's definitely been a quieter night in terms of bombings on Gaza by the IDF. And here in Tel Aviv, we've certainly heard fewer fighter jets rippling down this coastline, as we've heard very consistently for the last week. Attention is being drawn elsewhere in the military perspective. In the north, the evacuation order has been extended by another mile in that region with southern Lebanon, as skirmishes between Lebanese Hezbollah continue with the IDF. And that is actually a more fearsome foe for the IDF to be dealing with. Their military budget stretches into the hundreds of millions of dollars. They're said to have anywhere between 50,000 to 100,000 fighters, and they do have more extreme capabilities to launch onto the Israelis. And there are further concerns for the Israelis too, as unrest grows in the West Bank. Overnight, the IDF said that they had arrested dozens of people in the West Bank suspected and alleged to belong to Hamas, and they've captured weapons and bombs and other munitions there as well. So Israel very much fighting on several fronts, trying to maintain an extremely delicate situation at the same time as the humanitarian crisis in Gaza deepens.
Charlie, do we have any updates when it comes to the hostage situation? That will be something that is keeping many people in Israel up at night.
Yes, well, 20 minutes ago, the Israelis claimed that there are at least 199 hostages within the Gaza Strip. And yesterday, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu actually met with the families. There's been some criticism in Israel that he had not yet met with any of those families. In fact, more reporters had met with family members than representatives of this unity government. But it's unclear how the IDF intends to rescue those hostages. Of course, they are keeping operational details close to their chests, but at the same time, that is a growing concern, as hostages could be kept in the north as human shields as the civilians move south, and the opportunity to rescue them dwindles. So that is a growing concern here in Israel, especially as the numbers of known hostages are rising.
OK. Thank you, Charlie. We'll be coming to Charlie throughout the morning to hear the latest there. Political commentator Piers Pottinger joins us in the studio now. When you see such a failure of humanity like this, Piers, it's hard to know where to start, even question where this goes and what the military strategy must be when you see children in intensive care hospital beds, babies, and if they move, that is a death sentence. It is the worst of humanity, and it's also the best of humanity in those doctors saying we will not leave their sides.
Yes, I mean, it was very moving, that report. But Hamas, I'm afraid, the masters of terror, have got Israel exactly where they want them. And not only does Hamas torture and murder innocent civilians, Israeli civilians, they obviously don't give a damn about their own people.
Yeah.
Because they knew full well Israel would have to retaliate, and they're also doing their best to stop people getting out of the country. It seems that they are being very, very instrumental in not getting the Rafah border open by dealing with the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, particularly. And you also have this added problem for Israel, which, although they've got hundreds of thousands of troops massed on the border, when they get into Israel, the Hamas terrorists themselves are in this huge network of underground tunnels. Hamas said in 2021 they had built 311 miles of underground tunnels, funded by Iran, of course. And the problem there is these tunnels, unlike in Vietnam, where they were very effective, the Vietnamese tunnels were in the countryside. These are in an urban setting, in a very densely populated area, with thousands of civilians living above these tunnels, which means it's very difficult for Israelis to attack them without killing lots of innocent people.
Yeah.
And Israel is acutely aware of the international concern about trying to retaliate without loss of life, unnecessary loss of civilian life. Unfortunately, that seems impossible. And so Hamas are reveling in the fact they've got Israel boxed in.
Yeah.
At the same time as Hezbollah now becoming more and more active, which is incredibly worrying. You have Iran making threats. The Iranian foreign minister on Saturday went to Qatar, where he met the head of Hamas. The Qataris themselves are coming under pressure for harbouring the head of Hamas in this way and allowing the Iranian foreign minister to go and have these meetings on their territory. Now, Qatar is the biggest commercial landlord in London, for example. It owns huge amounts of property in Britain and many other assets, including the famous department store Harrods. Now, I mean, again, it seems absurd to be talking about a British department store with what's going on, but the repercussions of what's going on are vast. And Hamas have realized they've timed this brilliantly from their point of view. They knew that Israel was weak because they were about to sign a pact, we believe, with Saudi Arabia, which has made them do this now. And of course, splitting up the Middle East and Saudi Arabia's stated enemy of Iran, supporting Hamas. The energy prices going up. I mean, this is not going to stop in a short space of time. And despite Blinken's admirable attempt at diplomacy, flying around and talking to everyone, Rishi Sunak had the head of Jordan in, and Jordan has been traditionally a very useful conduit diplomatically in Middle East crises in the past. But I think Hamas, unfortunately, are holding all the cards at the moment, and they know it. And that's what's so worrying.
It's interesting you say that would you go so far as to say that Hamas have the upper hand here?
Yes, I'm afraid so, because they've already...
Even considering the size of Israel's army, even considering the Western support that Israel has?
They've pushed them into a sort of catch-22 situation where the Israelis will not be able to wipe Hamas out, as they said they would, without a huge amount of lateral damage, with lots and lots of innocent people killed.
Yeah.
Hamas know that, and they don't mind if it's their, even though they're technically, they claim their own people. That's what's so horrific about a terror group. That anyone's life, even their own supposed people, it doesn't matter to them because they're so fanatical in what they want to achieve. Yes.
Martyrdom.
And so just to be clear, so the hostages inside Gaza, the Israeli hostages, which Hamas will be using as a human shield to protect the terrorists, Hamas are also, by so many Gazans staying in that area, Israel know that if they go, that's where you mean they're using their own people as a human shield.
Yes,
because the civilian collateral of a significant Israeli assault, be that via the ground or from air.
Well, there are about 500,000 people, I think, still left in Gaza of the Palestinians, and most of them are living above tunnels where the terrorists are operating from, where they store their weapons, where they store all kinds of supplies, and they are living above that, which means that the Israeli drones and bombs, well, the drones are not effective because they can't see below the buildings, but also if they bomb the buildings, they're going to kill thousands of innocent people. And Hamas have, known this right from the start, and that's why they built all these tunnels.
Can I ask you, Piers, what is the best case scenario?
The best case scenario is
the loss of life.
Is that somehow a ceasefire is agreed. And but the trouble is, I don't know how you can negotiate with Hamas. I mean, they're not a group of people who are interested in ceasefire or negotiation. They are reveling in this slaughter. And no one should lose sight of that. And the Israelis are in a terribly difficult position. And also Netanyahu himself, the leader of Israel, is not in a strong position in his own government. I mean, the political situation within Israel is far from secure.
Yes, so just to put it in a little historical context, he was deeply unpopular last weekend when this invasion happened on the 7th of October, wasn't he? His people were almost turning against him.
Well, because normally the Israelis are so adept at intelligence and preempting any kind of strikes, and they've somehow missed this. And so his own defence ministry and all the people involved under Netanyahu, and he's the boss, so he takes the blame, had to take the blame. That's why, of course, Hamas knew he'd be under huge pressure to retaliate with everything he could. They must be a little bit disappointed they haven't already gone in and are actually holding back, because from the point of view of that Israel have got to hold back so that they can say to the international community, people who are already beginning to criticise them without them even having gone in yet, but they've got to hold back in order to say we've given people time to leave, we're trying to avoid civilian deaths, but it's going to be, for the reasons I've just explained, impossible to avoid that. And Hamas actually want them, I'm afraid to say, to kill as many of their own people as possible. Ridiculous as though that sounds, that shows you the kind of people we're dealing with these vile terrorists.
Well, this is one of the major problems. Lots of calls for restraint.
Yeah.
Israel to, restrain itself, not go in, and the fear of so many lives. But then, as you also mention, one cannot negotiate with a terrorist group like Hamas. No. There is no peaceful solution to be found with Hamas.
No, it is a really dreadful situation, which in the short term I can only see getting worse, I'm afraid.
You see, I don't know if there's been enough calls for peace. I can't think of any major leader of any country that has come out and asked for any sort of ceasefire.
Well, Hamas wants to annihilate Israel and the Jewish people. So what peace can be found?
Exactly. And also, I'm afraid to say, the Muslim world, and, there are an awful lot of Muslims in the world, they have remained remarkably silent.
Yes.
And that is also deeply concerning.
And that's I think that's partly what I mean, but also, obviously, in that immediate aftermath at the last weekend, when Joe Biden was saying, this is evil, he actually, this is evil, and it is evil, don't get me wrong. And obviously, the weight of the international community was behind Israel striking back as hard as it possibly could, understandably. But where are the leaders saying, can we all just stop killing people and come to some sort of diplomatic solution here?
They're trying. I mean, they've sent Blinken all over the world trying to do this. As I said, Rishi has been talking to Jordan, who is a traditional conduit for this sort of thing, through to the Muslim communities. But you've got Iran, who actually publicly said they were supporting Hamas and, believed this was a good thing Hamas were doing. You've got to bear in mind that the large swathes of the international community are silently supporting Hamas, which is a terrifying thought. And also in Britain and in Europe, we're already seeing anti-Semitic outbursts, some killings. And it is a really scary time.
And let's remember,
for the civilized world.
If it weren't for the Iron Dome and Israel's defences, there would be carnage in Israel at the moment, ongoing.
Right, thank you, Piers. OK, still to come this morning, we're going to be continuing the live coverage of the conflict in the Middle East. We'll be crossing back to Tel Aviv to speak to our reporter, Charlie Peters. And as you can see, we're looking at pictures of the Rafah crossing at the Egypt-Gaza border to see if people will be allowed to cross to some sort of relative safety. First, the weather.
Hello there, good morning to you. I'm Jonathan Vautry here with your GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. This week is one of two halves, and we are starting off with the more settled one because high pressure is in charge, bringing fairly fair conditions for many of us. A lot of dry weather around today despite the chilly start in places. There is a reasonable amount of cloud, so the sunshine is a touch hazy at times. Could see a few showers pushing into the far southeast, maybe some coasts of western and northern Scotland as well, but most places should stay dry. Temperatures generally around 11 to 13 degrees Celsius, which is just slightly below where we should be for the time of year, so a bit cold around at times, but generally fine conditions persisting into this evening and overnight as well. Maybe a few mist and fog patches forming around, but the breeze will be strengthening in the south, and an increasing amount of cloud as well will mean that temperatures will hold up a touch more here compared to some recent nights. But where we see those starry skies persist across northern England into southern central Scotland, another chilly one once again, and rural areas can certainly expect some frost. But a fair amount of sunshine for Scotland to start off on Tuesday. The shield of cloud, though, will gradually push its way northwards throughout the day, turning very gusty across parts of Wales and the southwest England, particularly around coast and over the hills. Some of this rain may just fringe slightly further towards these areas as well. Temperatures up a touch, 13 to 15 degrees Celsius, but the heaviest rain is set to turn towards us as we head throughout the second half of the week, providing some disruption in places. Bye-bye.
Right, still to come. The Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, is warning that inciting hatred will not be tolerated. That's after clashes and 15 arrests at pro-Palestine rallies this weekend. We'll be getting into that in just one moment. This is Britain's Newsroom. We're on GB News, the People's Channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
me this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good morning, it's 10 a.m. on Monday, the 16th of October. This is Britain's Newsroom with me, Emily Carver, and Bev Turner. Now, mixed reports of a possible ceasefire this morning.
Rafah will be open. We're putting in place with the United Nations, with Egypt, with Israel, with others, the mechanism by which to get the assistance in.
Anthony Blinken there saying that the Gaza-Egypt crossing could reopen to help those fleeing the war, but Hamas are saying that nothing has been agreed, as has the Israeli militia.
Prime Minister Rishi Sunak will address the House of Commons later to set out the UK's response to the escalating conflict.
No glorifying terrorism. Home Secretary Suella Braverman warns that police will pursue anyone mocking the murder of Jews. At least 15 people were arrested at protests over the weekend.
And migration mess. Net migration will remain above pre-Brexit levels without policy change. That's according to Oxford University experts. We'll bring you the latest.
And we'll have the very latest live from Israel with Charlie Peters, and we are expecting to hear live also from Anthony Blinken during the show. First, though, here's your very latest news with Tamsin Roberts.
Bev, thank you and good morning from the GB Newsroom. It's 1 minute past 10. The Prime Minister will address the escalating crisis in the Middle East along with the UK's response to the violence later as MPs return to Westminster. Well, these are live pictures from Sderot in Israel looking towards northern Gaza, where the United Nations is warning the humanitarian situation is deteriorating quickly. Israel has ordered civilians to evacuate the area ahead of a major offensive targeting Hamas in response to an attack which claimed 1,300 lives. Gaza's health ministry says 2,750 Palestinians have been killed since the 7th of October and 9,700 people wounded by Israeli airstrikes. Well, let's just take you to live pictures of the Egyptian-controlled Rafah crossing on the border with Gaza, where people are gathering outside closed gates there. Earlier, fuel tankers were seen in the area, escorted by vehicles carrying the United Nations flag. There are also conflicting reports about a ceasefire. Egyptian security sources suggested it had been agreed between the US, Israel and Egypt to allow the safe passage of humanitarian aid. But a statement from Israel's Prime Minister said there is currently no truce. Well, Israel's military continues to amass outside Gaza, preparing for a ground offensive. The country's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, has vowed to demolish Hamas. The US President Joe Biden says he's confident Israel will act under the rules of war and that he believes Hamas must be eliminated. But in an interview added there must be a path to a Palestinian state. Well, the US Secretary of State has been holding talks over the last few days with Arab nations. These are live shots from Tel Aviv. Antony Blinken returning to Israel after meeting the Prime Minister 5 days ago. He's working to prevent the Israel-Hamas war from igniting a broader regional conflict. Well, it's believed around 10 British nationals are among those being held hostage by Hamas. Armed Forces Minister James Heappey says the government is working to help people out of the conflict zone.
We are planning and executing the evacuation of British citizens from the region should they wish to leave. There are opportunities to do that both from Tel Aviv, where a number of flights have now departed, but also we hope later today through the Rafah crossing on the border between Gaza and Egypt as well.
3 men have been charged with criminal offences after being arrested at a pro-Palestinian march in London. The Met Police says the suspects are among 15 people detained at the demonstration on Saturday. The charges include making racist comments, having a knife in a public place and failing to remove a face covering. The Foreign Secretary is set to address illegal migration at the Berlin Process Summit in Albania. James Cleverly will work to boost cooperation with Western Balkan leaders to ease tensions and curb small boat crossings in the Channel. He'll highlight a 90% reduction in Albanian small boats arrivals, crediting a successful deal. He also plans to launch a British Chamber of Commerce and open a joint migration task force. Experts believe net migration to the UK is unlikely to drop below 250,000 a year by the end of the decade. Net migration stood at 606,000 last year, with the war in Ukraine and arrivals from Hong Kong contributing to the numbers. The Migration Observatory at the University of Oxford and the London School of Economics say going forward, the figure will largely be driven by international students. Executive Director of Migration Watch, Dr. Mike Jones, says the projections are overly optimistic.
I'd be surprised if the net migration figures came below 300,000. Simply because they assume that student emigration will remain at around 80%. But Robert Jenrick has said that the number of people staying here long term is around 40%, and he gets that data from the ISA database. There are also assumptions about asylum levels remaining the same as they are now, but I would question that.
The Justice Secretary is planning to send more foreign prisoners home to ease pressure on the system. Alex Chalk will set out a range of reforms for England and Wales later, which could bring forward legislation that would allow prisoners to be held overseas. That's a move that's been already taken by Belgium and Norway. The plans also include sending fewer low-level offenders to prison. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now it's back to Bev and Emily.
So it's a very tense situation in the Middle East this Monday morning, more than at any point, actually, in the last week. There are mixed reports now of a potential ceasefire in southern Gaza to coincide with the reopening of the Rafah border crossing.
Yes, just on that, it seems that actually Israeli bombardments are now intensifying. Yes, there were hopes for this brief ceasefire. That was to allow foreign passport holders to leave Gaza and for also aid to be brought in, but it looks like that's been dashed for now.
Well, 1 million Palestinians have already fled Gaza, we believe, but as you're looking at here, this is the Rafah crossing at the Egypt-Gaza border. At the moment, that border is closed. So there will be, I think it's about 1 million people who remain in Gaza, some of whom will choose to stay and some of whom will be wanting to escape. Some of whom who are already in hospitals will have no choice.
And let's remember, Hamas have told Gaza residents to stay put.
Absolutely. The other dimension, of course, this morning is that Hezbollah in the Lebanon have said that if Israel launches an all-out offensive on Gaza, they will have no choice but to attack Israel in defence. So let's talk now to retired Officer Colonel Richard Kemp. Good morning, Richard. I think Richard is. Good morning, Richard. You are in Israel now, I believe. Is that right? And if so, why?
Yeah, I'm here monitoring and observing the conflict.
Is that in an official capacity or in your capacity as a commentator?
No, it's just my private capacity. I've got no official role here.
OK. And what are you seeing in your observations? What are we maybe not aware of here in London?
Well, I'm sure you've got a team over here as well, so I'm sure you're aware of most of what's going on. But I've been up on the Lebanese border in the last 2 days, and up there there's an enormous state of tension because, as you are aware and as you've reported, there have been intensive Hezbollah attacks, and of course Hezbollah, like Hamas, funded and supported and to an extent controlled by Iran. And the people up there, I visited a couple of villages pretty close to the border as well as the troops there. The people up there are expecting a significant bombardment by Hezbollah. It's already begun. We've already seen more intensive activities there than at any time since the Second Lebanese War. And people are also fearful of the possibility of Hezbollah getting through the border and attacking their villages as they did down in the south. And Hezbollah, of course, let's not forget, are a far more disciplined, organised and capable terrorist organisation than Hamas are. So it's terrifying for them. The Israelis have evacuated quite a large number of them down to the south from the closest areas. The troops in the area also have been engaging Hezbollah mainly by air as a result of their attacks. But I think there's a general feeling that something is afoot in the north. Now, it may be that, as you just reported, that Hezbollah threatens to attack if Israel goes in on the ground in Gaza. And I think it's quite possible that will be the case. We'll wait and see. Down in the south, I've been around the border area of Gaza as well in the last few days, and it's the same situation in many ways. Hamas in the south is being battered, as you know, by Israeli rockets, Israeli aircraft, artillery fire as well. And there are a large number of troops massed there, ready to go in, absolutely now ready to go in the minute they're given the order to do so.
Richard, we're expecting to hear from Antony Blinken, US Secretary of State, very soon, I think. Also, Rishi Sunak will be standing up in the House of Commons later this afternoon. There'll be a debate in this country, presumably about the UK's role in all of this, what it should be, what it can be, whether there will be some kind of ceasefire at some point. It seems like that is certainly not happening as it stands. What can we expect from Antony Blinken, do you expect?
Well, Blinken has been travelling the area in order to, I think, predominantly, I think his primary purpose is to prevent other countries in the region from supporting Hamas or getting involved. I don't think he's got any aspiration at all to try and stop what Israel's doing. Quite the contrary, I think the Americans are pretty supportive of what Israel's doing. He's obviously also been talking to Egypt about the idea of opening the Rafah crossing and allowing humanitarian aid in, and maybe allowing some people out through Egypt. As far as a ceasefire is concerned, I don't expect Israel will have a ceasefire, but very clearly Israel is not going to attack in the south, where they've told Gazan civilians to evacuate to. That would make no sense, and they would not do that. So the area around the southern part of Gaza remains, from Israel, relatively safe. It doesn't necessarily remain safe from Hamas, who might, as they've done many times in the past, attempt to attack their own people in order to try and put the blame on Israel. So I think that situation down there is a relatively safe one for those who are able to get out. But I can't see Israel having certainly a ceasefire across the whole of Gaza. Israel is intent. All the commanders and the soldiers I've spoken to and the politicians I've spoken to are intent on annihilating Hamas, but they're also intent on minimising civilian casualties, and they take every possible step to do that.
Richard, can I ask you a naive question? This is a very steep learning curve for all of us. It's not for you. You are an expert in these matters. If Hezbollah do start to also attack Israel, what could that mean for the people of Lebanon, for the civilians of Lebanon? How would they be dragged into this?
I think if that happens, a lot of civilians in southern Lebanon are going to be killed. And again, it won't be because the IDF want to kill them. It will be because Hezbollah have about 150,000 rockets in southern Lebanon pointing at Israel, the length and breadth of Israel. Some very, very dangerous, particularly dangerous rockets, precision guided. And these are very often they're in people's houses. They're among the community. They're in the population. If Israel is to stop them firing and killing their own people, then unfortunately, whatever attempts to prevent it they can take, they will not be able to do that without killing innocent civilians. And we're going to see an intensive war in southern Lebanon. We will see very, very heavy airstrikes against Hezbollah positions. We may well see Israeli ground forces going in as well up in the north. So we're going to see basically a widening of the war to the extent that Israel is fighting a war on both fronts, which it's going to be very challenging for Israel, but Israel is prepared and trained to do that. And then, of course, we shouldn't forget, over to the east, we've got Syria, where Iran also has been pushing forward its militias, its proxies, in an attempt to attack Israel from there. They've got, compared to Gaza and Lebanon, the available power in Syria is much less, but it's still there.
Yeah. OK, thank you so much. Retired Army Officer Colonel Richard Kemp there with his brilliant expertise. We're joined now by Charlie Peters live from Tel Aviv. Good morning, Charlie. For people who are just tuning in at 10:15 on a Monday morning, just give us a recap of the very latest and just explain how tense this situation now is.
Well, it certainly is extremely tense, as violence is expected to escalate on several fronts here. In the north, as we have just heard, there has been continued skirmishes between Lebanese Hezbollah and the IDF up there. The IDF announced death of an officer overnight who'd been struck by an anti-tank guided missile, and helicopter gunships were deployed by the Israelis to the north to strike Hezbollah positions in southern Lebanon. So definitely an escalation in that region. And they've also extended the evacuation zone in northern Israel to give civilians less space they can gather in as they anticipate more shelling, mortaring positions from the north. It also gives them more space to deploy their own defensive positions in the north as that violence escalates. And then to the east, we have seen a resurgence in Israeli strikes on Syrian ground targets. They've once again struck Aleppo International Airport, which was put out of action until 8 a.m. this morning because of those strikes, limiting the use of the runway. And I think those strikes really are a message to the Iranian proxies in the region to say, if you act, we will strike. We're unafraid to use our force in foreign territory to limit your forces. But down here in central Tel Aviv, it's been relatively quiet this morning. No rocket attacks where we are, some a few miles to the north, where Iron Dome intercepted them. We heard those explosions. But the real concern is in the south, particularly on that Rafah crossing, where tens of thousands have gathered, hoping to cross into Egypt and waiting also for humanitarian aid to come across. There has been discussion of a ceasefire in the area, but in many ways there is a de facto ceasefire because Israel does not want to use munitions in the south because it is trying to push civilians from the north into the south so that they can direct their efforts in stages into Gaza City in the north of the Strip. So it doesn't make sense for them to strike there. But there won't be any official ceasefire from the Israeli side, they said last night, until Hamas hands in those at least 199 hostages and also hands in all of their fighters. This is obviously unlikely to happen, and so what we're going to see, I think, is that increased bombardment of the north as more civilians flee south, and then expected movement from that southern convoy of armour as they prepare for that ground invasion. We will see more localised raids, it's almost certain, on those defensive positions that Hamas have set up, particularly their anti-tank positions, to allow Israeli forces to enter. But at the moment, the Israeli side are struggling with the information war. And Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, he has just landed in Israel to continue his diplomatic efforts, 9 days on from the atrocities experienced here in Israel, where well over 1,400 people were butchered in the most appalling ways. The Prime Minister here describing it as ISIS-style butchery. People are now moving their attention towards what's going on in Gaza, as local reports say over 1,000 remain stuck under rubble. There has been a shift in attention in that direction, and I think Israel is struggling to reaffirm its grip and its narrative on the situation, and that's why that diplomatic efforts, especially from the US, to achieve that humanitarian situation is going to be key in whether or not they can move into the next phase. Last night, Joe Biden said that any occupation of Gaza would be a big mistake. Occupation or not, they're almost certainly going to invade.
OK, thank you, Charlie. It's an incredibly tense situation. You be careful. And no doubt Charlie will be joining us throughout the morning. Let us know your thoughts this morning, gbviews@gbnews.com. Some of your emails are coming through, which we are checking now. Our political editor, Christopher Hope, is at Downing Street. Good morning, Christopher. What is the latest from Downing Street in relation to this conflict? What are we hearing from the Prime Minister?
Well, we're hearing from the Prime Minister later today, Bev, in House of Commons. We're expecting some words from him this morning, which will play out on GB News as soon as we can. I've been struck, actually, being here in number 10 Downing Street, how the flags on top of the building have changed overnight. Lucia, the camerawoman, will show you now. Previously, that was the Israeli flag for a week, and now it's been replaced by the Ukraine flag on top of Downing Street. And that, to me, illustrates, I think, the twin pressures on the government at the moment. They've got this massive war. They have a big war going on in Ukraine. We're supporting Ukrainians repelling the Russian invaders, and at the same time there's a real risk of a major conflagration in the Middle East. And I think those two twin pressures, there are issues now with bandwidth. How much can this government make sure they can have the appropriate focus on both those conflicts and making sure UK interests are best represented? Because of course there are as many as 10 British hostages confirmed by the Foreign Office yesterday, around 10, in Gaza at the moment. That's who were taken from Israel by Hamas last week, and that's why I think there's so many pressures on the government from two massive foreign policy challenges. And for me, the flags on the building behind me demonstrate that.
OK. Thank you, Chris. Did you have a question, Emily?
Well, I was just going to ask about the Home Secretary's comments, but we can discuss that between us about Suella Braverman. She's come down very strong. He's still there, Chris. Yes, Home Secretary Suella Braverman, she's had something to say about the pro-Palestinian protests, hasn't she?
That's right. Well, there were big issues yesterday, just on Whitehall. They were demonstrating yesterday, having a march on Saturday. Forgive me, having a march from the BBC. Big concerns about whether the police overlooked pro-Hamas demonstrations. Of course, most of them there, the vast majority of demonstrators were supporting Palestinians who are now under threat in Gaza from the probable Israeli invasion. But certainly, the Home Secretary was clearly concerned about elements of pictures on people's jackets and other flags and the rest of it, which could demonstrate support for Hamas. Hamas, of course, is a proscribed terrorist group in the UK, so she'll want to know why the police were not taking any action. The police, of course, might say that's operational for us to decide, and they were trying to manage a very big number of people and make sure it passed off peacefully.
Okay, thank you so much, Christopher Hope there at Downing Street. Let us know your thoughts this morning.
We may talk about it a little bit later. I'd like to anyway, and I'm sure you would. Lots of people worried about the fact that these protests were taking place right by the cenotaph, which of course is to remember our war dead.
And the organisers said we're going to have to do this every weekend until this ends. This brings the centre of London to a standstill in support of Palestine. Are you OK with that? GBviews at gbnews.com. Right, still to come this morning. Low-level offenders will clean up graffiti and plant trees instead of being sent to prison. Does the punishment fit the crime? We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to ordinary people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christys, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
It's It's 10:25 in the morning. You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with me, Emily Carver, and of course Bev Turner.
You've been getting in touch at home. Thank you so much. gbviews@gbnews.com is the email address if you'd like to get in touch with us. Robert has said, 2 wrongs do not make a right. The poor children, it's so upsetting. The issue should have been dealt with years ago. They've known of Hamas.
Yes, and Robert says 2 wrongs do not make... Oh, you said that one. Sorry. Marion says, I can understand why Egypt is sceptical about letting Palestinians into their territory. Some of them could be Hamas taking off their uniforms, blending in with ordinary Palestinian people, escaping the bombing. Now, this is what's difficult also on the Israeli side when it comes to this ground assault, and maybe one of the reasons why they're delaying it, have delayed it for quite a while now, is however hard you try to only pinpoint those who are with Hamas, very difficult when there are just such huge numbers of civilians in that small area, because it is a very small area.
You know, for the first time this weekend, Emily, it's a little informal for a news show, I was concerned about going into London, and I was concerned about my children going into London this weekend. I think particularly because there was a call for the Day of Jihad on Friday. Fortunately, things came and went on Friday with no significant disruption. But my kids had events at the weekend. One was in Leicester Square. And for the first time ever, I felt like I didn't want them to go. In the end, I did let them go, because I did conclude we can't live
I thought
like
twice
that.
too, Bev, myself, of, you know, going in on the Friday and the Saturday as well. But you've got to live your life. It's quite interesting. Lots of emails coming in about the protests. A lot of people aren't happy that this is going on in our streets. It can be very intimidating. And then think about Jewish communities. You know, Jeremy Corbyn, he was talking about how we're mourning the loss of Israeli and Palestinian lives alike, but you wouldn't want to go down there with an Israeli flag, would you?
No, you would not. And how awful. And I think what it's sort of bringing home to me is that this anti-Semitic, this anti-Jew feeling has been low-level, bubbling away under the surface here in this country for decades. I grew up in a very, very Jewish part of Manchester. I wasn't aware of anti-Semitism growing up. It's not something I've been aware of. I can't comprehend it. But it's real. And we know that Jewish people are really frightened at the moment.
It is, but... we are going to move on.
Right, low-level criminals will be made to clean up graffiti, and also plant flowers, I think it is.
Plant trees.
Plant trees.
Plant trees. Yes, this is Alex Chalk, the Justice Secretary. He's going to be talking later about this. His big idea to reform the justice system, specifically prison sentences. He wants to get tough on long-term sentences, i.e. for rapists, violent criminals, but then also look at how to reduce the pressure on prisons for those with lesser crimes, deemed lesser crimes.
Absolutely, and I think we're going to be talking. We're talking now to Steve Fuller and Val Walrus. Good morning, both. Good morning, both. Thank you.
2 for 1.
Good morning.
Thank you very much for joining us. So tell us, why do you think this is a good idea, that we take prisoners, criminals, and rather than locking them up, we put them to work? I have to say, I'm on board.
Well, first of all, it's Steve Freer, and it's Val Vavros. But yeah, we are as well. I think for the first time, the fact that the prisons are bursting at the seams, they've had to think a bit differently. It's whether we want a short-term fix or a long-term solution for me. If you want a short-term fix, keep sending people to prison for short sentence, expensive, very expensive sentences that are even more damaging than not sending them. And obviously the community sentence is a great start, but what beyond that? And Temper Snowboard, the charity that we formed off the back of these problems, actually solves that by offering employment. So it's either a short-term fix of prison sentences or the community sentences, because what's beyond that? And we've found employment is the answer.
Now, a prison sentence is supposed to be, presumably in part, well, it is meant to be a deterrent of sorts to stop people from reoffending. That's first and foremost the importance of a prison sentence. Are community sentences, like planting a few trees, is that really going to dissuade people from committing crimes?
Probably not, but the alternative is to incarcerate them.
at a cost of £36,500 per prisoner per year. 46,500 pounds per prisoner per year. And we've been doing this for decades and it hasn't worked. We do something quite different. It costs us £3,500 to place someone into work, an ex-offender, into work, and keep them in that job for 12 months. Now, do you want to pay £3,500, Alex Chalk, or do you want to pay £46,500, I ask you?
It's working really successfully in Yorkshire. We've now placed over 900 people into sustainable employment. We just need some serious support from government to roll this out across the UK, and then you'd see reoffending rates reduce significantly.
Hence, then, the prison places. There'll be more prison places available.
Tell us a little bit, guys, about the kind of people that you work with. What are their stories that get them to the place where they're committing crime in the first place?
Great point. The vast majority have come from poverty, and we're talking the level of poverty that you and I have never seen and never want to see. This is 1 in 4 who have come through the care system. And we use that word very loosely, don't we, care? We know what happens in a lot of cases, sadly. These people then form the wrong sort of relationships with, get on the wrong side of the law and end up in prison. Sadly, the majority of them, they don't even know what love is. Can you imagine that? You've been brought up in such a horrendous environment that you don't know what love is. And actually, when they come to us for a job, which thankfully now they do in the Yorkshire area, they're so grateful. They become the hardest working and most loyal employees in the business.
A lot of people will say everyone deserves a second chance. A lot of the people that we help have never even had a first chance, to be honest. They've been brought up in dysfunctional families. Mum were never there, dad were partly there, or the other way around. They've been dragged up, basically, not gone to school, no education, so they look to the local drug dealers and vagabonds and look at them as role models. They've been sent to prison purely, a lot of them, 60 to 70%, because they come from poverty, and it's as simple as that.
That's not to be soft on crime. Our time spent in prisons has certainly given us a real insight. And people that are serving sentences for heinous crimes deserve locking up for a long time, if not forever. But there's a lot of people into the criminal justice system purely because of circumstances.
Gentlemen, you are brilliant. You're inspirational. I hate that word, but in this case it applies. Keep up your good work. Thank you so much. Val Waros and Steve Freer there. They're the founders of Tempest Nova, a charity that helps people, prisoners, reform their lives.
Yes, so coming up, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has denied reports of a ceasefire to allow foreigners out of South Gaza and humanitarian aid in. US media had reported that Egypt could reopen the Rafah crossing for several hours. It remains closed, and closer to home, net migration is very unlikely to fall in the coming years. It's going to remain at pre-Brexit levels of about 300,000.
That and much more after your morning's news with Tamsin Roberts.
Beth, thank you. Here are the headlines at 10:34. Well, we can start with some breaking news. A man once suspected of being part of an Islamic State death squad known as the Beatles has pleaded guilty to terrorism charges. Amy Leslie Davis appeared via video link from Belmarsh Prison and admitted possessing a firearm for terrorism purposes and 2 counts of funding terrorism. His sentencing has been adjourned until next month. That news just in here this morning. The Prime Minister will address the escalating crisis in the Middle East along with the UK's response to the violence later as MPs return to Westminster. Well, these are live pictures from Sderot in Israel looking towards northern Gaza, where the United Nations is warning the humanitarian situation is deteriorating quickly. Israel has ordered civilians to evacuate the area ahead of a major offensive targeting Hamas in response to an attack which claimed 1,300 lives. Gaza's health ministry says 2,750 Palestinians have been killed since the 7th of October and 9,700 people wounded by Israeli airstrikes. Well, let's take you to live pictures of the Egyptian-controlled Rafah crossing on the border with Gaza, where people are gathering outside closed gates at the moment. Earlier, fuel tankers were seen in the area, escorted by vehicles carrying the United Nations flag. To other news now, the Foreign Secretary is set to address illegal migration at the Berlin Process Summit in Albania. James Cleverly will work to boost cooperation with Western Balkan leaders to ease tensions and curb small boat crossing in the Channel. He'll highlight a 90% reduction in Albanian small boat arrivals, crediting a successful deal. Those are the headlines, and you can, of course, get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com. Well, here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2162 and €1.1539. The price of gold is £1,573.66 per ounce. And the FTSE 100's at 7,616 points.
Well, welcome back to Britain's Newsroom with me, Emily Carver, and Bev Turner.
So still to come this morning, thousands of people are gathering at the Rafah crossing in the hope of leaving Gaza imminently. We're going to bring you up to date on any developments as they happen. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News. What is going on?
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
And Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Britain's Newsroom on GB News with me, Emily Carver, and Bev Turner.
So Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has been speaking to the media in the last few minutes. Let's have a listen to what he had to say.
Call this morning specifically to demonstrate my solidarity with the Jewish community here in the UK and let them know that we're going to do everything in our power to keep them safe. Last week I met with the Community Security Trust and police chiefs. We provided more funding for the Community Security Trust. That's the organisation that helps keep schools, synagogues and other Jewish community institutions safe. We spent time with the police to make sure they have all the tools, powers and guidance they need to police protests over the weekend appropriately and strike that right balance. And it's a difficult job, but I'm grateful to them for everything that they've done. They've made several arrests, but they're also now reviewing footage of some of the things that many people will have seen that are just simply not acceptable, and where they can, they will be able to make further arrests. But I'm determined to ensure that our Jewish community is able to feel safe on our streets. There is no place in our society for anti-Semitism, and we will do everything we can to stamp it out. And where it happens, it will be met with the full force of the law.
Now, you were asked by one of the children just now, where is the line between protesting for Palestinians and supporting Hamas? It's a great question. What's your answer?
Well, Hamas is a proscribed terrorist organisation. It's very clear under the law that support and glorification of Hamas is illegal, and those offences are punishable with up to almost 14 years in jail. The police have that guidance. They know that. That's why I met with them specifically last week in advance of this weekend's protest to make sure they were crystal clear about what's okay and what's not okay. But it's not just about Hamas. More broadly, actions that incite violence or stir up religious hatred and racial violence are also not acceptable, and that's why, as I said, there's no place in our society for that type of hatred and division, and it will be met with the full force of the law where it happens.
Now, it's a fast-moving situation in the Middle East. Is there anything you can say at all about the half dozen or so British citizens who have been taken hostage by Hamas? Is Britain working with the US to keep safe routes open, and what's our role in the humanitarian effort?
Yeah, it's one of the things that I've been discussing with students here today who obviously have family and friends that are impacted by this in Israel. Now, we're doing everything we can to provide support. I know it's an anxious time for many families who will have loved ones who are impacted or missing. We're providing all the consular support through the Foreign Office that we can, and also providing direct support to the Israelis. And the humanitarian situation is one which, of course, we're concerned about, and that I've raised in all the calls and interactions I've had with other leaders from across the region, and in particular making sure that we can try and get the Rafah crossing open. That will ease the humanitarian situation. That's why I prioritised speaking with President Sisi of Egypt early on last week to talk about that, and we will continue to do everything we can to alleviate the humanitarian situation on the ground, including moving some of our Royal Navy assets into the region who can provide further support as required.
Now, nobody challenges Israel's central aim right now to destroy the terrorist group Hamas, whose barbarism shocked the world. The debate, the worry for many, is the hundreds of thousands of civilians in Gaza, and whether now military action will mean large numbers of casualties in that group. Do you share that worry? Do you urge Israel to show restraint and discipline to avoid casualties in that group of people?
We have to remember that the entity responsible for all of this suffering is Hamas. Hamas is a terrorist organisation which has perpetrated a horrific act of terror which has caused the death of over 1,000 people. Israel does have every right to defend itself and its people to ensure that nothing like this ever happens again. I think that's what the Israeli people would expect from their government, is that if something like this happened here, it's what people would expect from this government, to make sure that they take the proportionate and necessary steps to keep everybody safe. Now, I've raised with the Israeli Prime Minister the need to minimise the impact on civilians best we can. I've raised the humanitarian situation. We will continue to do that with other allies around the region as well. But again, Israel has given people advance notice of what's happening, given them the opportunity to leave, and it's Hamas who is now telling people to stay behind. It's Hamas that is embedding itself inside civilian populations, and that is just an example of the barbarity with which they operate. They are not doing the right thing by the Palestinian people by those actions, and they should be held accountable for that.
Do you worry where the end game of all of this is, that it could be an open-ended occupation by Israel of Gaza?
I think Israel's been very clear that Hamas is the the entity that's responsible for this, and what they want to do is ensure that their people are safe and that this doesn't happen again, and that the focus of their attention of self-defense is on Hamas. And I think that's right. Nobody wants to see regional escalation. Certainly the Israeli Prime Minister does not. When I've spoken to him, I've been speaking to other leaders around the region. All of us are united in not wanting to see regional escalation. And again, that's something that we can help with. We've already sent surveillance aircraft to the Eastern Mediterranean last week. They will be able to, as I said, make sure that no arms shipments, for example, are being sent to other terrorist organisations in the region. That's a practical step that we can take to help ensure that this remains contained to dealing with Hamas and does not spread more broadly in the region.
Finally, domestically, Prime Minister, you're having to rewrite sentencing policy today because you've all but run out of prison places. You've had to scrabble around and redo the Network North announcements because your government announced funding for projects already completed. Your government told schools the wrong funding figures for next academic year and are now having to explain why you're reducing that figure. You came in replacing Liz Truss, promising competence. Are you embarrassed?
No, I think when it comes to HS2, I took the right long-term decision for the country, which was to say that we would take that £36 billion and instead of expanding HS2, that we would spend every penny of that money on hundreds of other transport projects around the country that will benefit people far faster and in far more ways than the types of transportation that they actually use. I think that's the right thing to do. Every single penny of that is new. It will make a difference to people. And just a couple of weeks' time, bus fares, for example, we're going to have to rise to £2.50. They will now be able to stay at £2 as a result of that decision, so the impact will be felt very quickly. And again, I appreciate that not everyone agree with me on that decision, but I think that is the right thing to do for this country. That's the type of change that I want to bring. That's the type of Prime Minister I'm going to be, because that's how we're going to change the direction of our country.
But do you accept that there have been some mistakes made in recent weeks?
No, we're always striving to deliver for the British people, but with regard to HS2, that is an enormous project. It took the time to go over that properly, and I'm not going to make any apologies for that. People would expect me to go over that in detail, given the sums of money involved, and then come to a decision that's right for the country. That's what we've done. And there's, of course, going to be people who disagree with that. There's lots of people who have been invested in this project for over a decade, but the facts have changed. And I think when the facts change, we've had a pandemic, the costs have skyrocketed. It's right to have the courage to change direction, and that's what I've done on that project. I get that people will have their own view, but I think the right thing is to take every penny of that money, £36 billion, and spend it in hundreds of projects in every part of our country that will benefit people far quicker. I think that's the right thing to do. Not an easy decision, but the right long-term one for our country.
That was Rishi Sunak talking this morning. I think the takeouts for me, Hamas are responsible for all of this suffering. Israel has every right to defend themselves, he said, but he also urges the Israeli Prime Minister to minimise impact on civilians as best that they can.
Yes, and also a reminder to those glorifying Hamas or being seen to support Hamas, a reminder that that is very much against the law and punishable by a prison sentence. So, with us, we are joined by a pair of authors and journalists, Nikki Hodgson and Emma Wolf with us. Emma, your reaction to what Rishi Sunak had to say there on the situation in Israel and Gaza?
Well, as always with Rishi Sunak, I feel he's saying pretty much the right thing, but in very little detail there. I mean, yes, of course, he's given his wholehearted support to Israel, and I think that's absolutely right. He doesn't really there answer the question about, people protesting on the streets of Britain. How long is this going to go on? Is it going to be allowed? He reminds us of the law and, it's punishable and all of that. There's not that much detail. Yes, we have sent surveillance aircraft since last week. We're surveying the area, checking this doesn't spread. How? How is any of this? What are we actually doing? It's, it's one thing to put a flag on your building. It's another thing to actually get down to the nitty-gritty of this terribly fraught and complicated situation. I would also ask those politicians and the Prime Minister and the leaders across, across the international community, why did this come out of nowhere? Why have we not dealt with this, years ago? Why were they all caught unawares?
Nikki, let's come to you. All I see when I look across the Middle East is a lot of masculine aggression, a lot of death and destruction. Interestingly, we're all sat here as four women looking at this, and I do think we bring a different sort of compassion to these sorts of stories, perhaps. But what do you make of it? I haven't spoken first time on this show for you. I haven't spoken to you on this. I've seen you on GBNews before. Just your assessment of the general situation this morning.
Yeah, it's desperate. I mean, I don't want to terrify anyone or frighten anyone unduly, but this is very, very frightening.
Yeah.
This is the worst situation the Middle East as a whole has been in probably for, I don't know, a century.
I agree.
This is I won't say what I was about to say, actually. I don't want to. Well, I was going to say, you know, this world wars have started on less of a dime. If you're not frightened of this situation, you're not paying attention, as we always say. I think what is so tricky historically with the region, you know, is actually surrounding, although this hasn't happened in Jerusalem, is the issue around Jerusalem being so significant for three major world faiths. And the tensions, if you've ever been to Jerusalem, I have been, actually. I went invited by the Israeli government, actually, full disclosure, to do some reporting. And it is a very, very tense place on the quietest day of the week, in the most peace, you know, in what has been, you know, a peaceful number of years. I cannot imagine what people feel like now in that region. I think what is really tricky about this situation is that I know there's an issue, there's lots of fear about where do you put these Gazans. There's 1 million people that have to go somewhere, and if you take them to the south without aid, they will die. Yeah. And if you potentially let them into Egypt, which Egypt doesn't want to do right now, who's going to look after them? Where's the money come to support them? We in the West would have to do that, which I don't have a problem with. Some people would. But there isn't an appetite for that from Egypt's perspective because they feel that they just can't take that number of immigrants and displaced people. We're not talking about people that come from somewhere they could potentially return to. We don't know what's going to happen to Gaza. It's going to be razed. It's going to be, you know, like a hinterland.
This is 1 million displaced people with no home to return to.
1 million people. And
it's a very good point.
And they're not migrants that want to leave, that are looking for work, that have, you know, they don't want to leave their homes any more than we do. None of us want to leave their homes. Bev, I'm really glad you brought up the issue of masculine aggression and that it's an all-female panel, because that's the thing I've been asking and thinking about over the last 8 days. How are men, any men, terrorists or not, Palestinians, Israelis, how are they able, and in fact, of course, it's the terrorists, it's the Hamas terrorists, how are they able to perpetrate those attacks on, we've seen disproportionately babies, children, pregnant women, you know, and we've seen terrible photographs. It really beggars belief.
It's ideology.
Many men.
It's ideology
which trumps
and that puts
everything.
The blinkers on, and it trumps everything because it's in their mind it's good versus evil.
Emily, these men are fathers, they are brothers, they are husbands.
Doesn't matter.
It just no. But when you try to imagine going into a nursery and torching it, when you try to imagine shooting a child, when you for any of us that are mothers or anyone actually. When you try to imagine that, I think that is what is really, really shocking. And Nikki's absolutely right. We've seen... This is very frightening. I was in a very Jewish area of North London, Stamford Hill, which is, you know, disproportionately kind of Jewish, even in the sort of Jewish community. And like you say, Bev, with your children, not wanting them to go into central London and all of that, outside the schools, outside the synagogues, heightened security. Many Jewish friends of mine in North London terrified to send their children to school, children taking off their uniforms. In London in 2023.
I think one of the worst, because we've seen more footage emerging, haven't we, particularly from last weekend, that Supernova Festival, the Peace and Music Festival, with those young people dancing at sunrise. One of the worst clips I saw this morning was that some of those festival goers went to shelters. They have shelters in that area. And so they were huddled inside the shelters, expecting the bombing to come from overhead. And because the terrorists were on foot, they took the pin out and they threw a hand grenade into the bomb shelter where all these young, beautiful people were. And I find that utterly... I cannot comprehend. I mean, well, Emily would say that is the Islamist ideology, correct? That is what is the brainwashing of these people to think that humanity doesn't matter unless you are one of them. Is it that simple, Nikki?
Well, I think when it comes to terrorists, particularly Hamas, they don't really have any care for life on Earth. That's kind of the point, isn't it? Yeah. That actually, this is all kind of like just the interim boring bit, and actually, you know, paradise is where you want to end up. So if you can try to get into the mindset of thinking this isn't where we're doing anything and what we do here doesn't matter because we've just got to get to there, that's why you would start to disconnect from all the consequences of your actions towards other humans, isn't it? That's where you start to become...
So the grandmothers, the babies, the children, the young people are simply pawns in your game.
Absolutely.
And that's our problem. How do you counter this? How do you ever reason or negotiate in that way?
Yeah, I'm very interested in how Rishi Sunak and the Home Secretary, what they've been saying about how this conflict is playing out in terms of rallies, protests here in this country. We saw pro-Palestinian rallies, flags, etc., around the Cenotaph. in central London, in Westminster. Lots to discuss there. I think we'll have to get onto that later on in the show, though.
I think so. Yep, ladies, thank you. No, we've got a little while longer, actually, here at the moment, which is good. Emma, where do we go? I mean, where do we go with this? This is the problem, isn't it? It is so desperate.
It is. And look at the situation, even the photographs that we're getting from the Rafah crossing. And as I said, these aren't people that necessarily want to leave their homes. There are many reasons why I think a lot of people are going to stay and just keep their fingers crossed and hope. But that's the reality of war. It's desperate, isn't it? It's cold, it's things running out. It's not dramatic, it's just desperate.
We're watching the live footage of Gaza here. We're going to be having more of this debate in just a few moments. Don't go anywhere. We're going to be going live to Tel Aviv, where Charlie Peters will be on the ground for us, GB News.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to ordinary people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
It's 11 a.m. on Monday, the 16th of October. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with me, Bev Turner, and this morning, Emily Carver.
Yes, the United Nations has warned that the spectre of death looms over Gaza as hundreds of thousands continue fleeing from the expected Israeli invasion.
Meanwhile, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has warned that glorifying Hamas in the UK can lead to long jail sentences, saying that Israel had a right to defend itself and its people. He'll be addressing the Commons later to set out the UK's response to the escalating conflict.
Deporting foreign criminals. Drug dealers, thieves and burglars will be held in immigration detention centres and deported to their country to tackle overcrowded prisons. The Justice Secretary Alex Chalk will outline his plans later today.
I am fascinated to hear the detail of that Alex Chalk statement because it seems so obvious that we probably should have been doing that anyway. So how can we now suddenly do it? Don't miss that here on GB News. Let us know your thoughts this morning. GBviews at gbnews.com. First, though, the very latest headlines with Tamsin Roberts.
Bev, thank you, and good morning from the GB Newsroom at 11:01. The Prime Minister will address the escalating crisis in the Middle East, along with the UK's response to the violence later today as MPs return to Westminster. Well, these are live pictures of Gaza, which has again been hit. Large plumes of black smoke can be seen here. Well, the United Nations is warning the humanitarian situation there is deteriorating quickly. Israel has ordered civilians to evacuate the area ahead of a major offensive targeting Hamas in response to an attack which claimed 1,300 lives. Israel says around 200 hostages are being held by Hamas, a larger number than previously thought. While Gaza's health ministry says 2,750 Palestinians have been killed since the 7th of October and 9,700 people wounded by Israeli airstrikes. Well, outside Gaza, Israel's military continues to amass, preparing for a ground offensive. The country's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, has vowed to demolish Hamas. The US President Joe Biden says he's confident Israel will act under the rules of war and that he believes Hamas must be eliminated. But in an interview added there must be a path to a Palestinian state. The Prime Minister here, Rishi Sunak, says he's working with Israel to minimise the war's impact on civilians.
Israel does have every right to defend itself and its people to ensure that nothing like this ever happens again. I think that's what the Israeli people would expect from their government, is that if something like this happened here, it's what people would expect from this government, to make sure that they take the proportionate and necessary steps to keep everybody safe. Now, I've raised with the Israeli Prime Minister the need to minimise the impact on civilians best we can. I've raised the humanitarian situation. We will continue to do that with other allies around the region.
The US Secretary of State's been holding talks over the last few days with Arab nations. Antony Blinken has returned to Israel after meeting the Prime Minister 5 days ago. He's working to prevent the Israel-Hamas war from igniting a broader regional conflict. 3 men have been charged with criminal offences after being arrested at a pro-Palestinian march in London. The Met Police says the suspects are among 15 people detained at the demonstration on Saturday. The charges include making racist comments, having a knife in a public place and failing to remove a face covering. To other news now. The Foreign Secretary is set to address illegal migration at the Berlin Process Summit in Albania. James Cleverly will work to boost cooperation with Western Balkan leaders to ease tensions and curb small boat crossings in the Channel. He'll also highlight there's been a 90% reduction in small boat arrivals, crediting a successful deal with Albania. Experts believe net migration to the UK is unlikely to drop below 250,000 a year by the end of the decade. Net migration stood at 606,000 last year, with the war in Ukraine and arrivals from Hong Kong contributing to the numbers. The Migration Observatory at the University of Oxford and the London School of Economics say going forward the figure will largely be driven by international students. Executive Director of Migration Watch, Dr. Mike Jones, says the projections are overly optimistic.
I'd be surprised if the net migration figures came below 300,000, simply because they assume that student emigration will remain at around 80%. But Robert Jenrick has said that the number of people staying here long term is around 40%, and he gets that data from the ISA database. There are also assumptions about asylum levels remaining the same as they are now, but I would question that.
The Justice Secretary is planning to send more foreign prisoners home to ease pressure on the system. Alex Chalk will set out a range of reforms for England and Wales later, which could bring forward legislation that would allow prisoners to be held overseas. That's a move that's been already taken by Belgium and Norway. The plans also include sending fewer low-level offenders to prison. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker. Just say play GB News. Now it's back to Bev and Emily.
Very good morning. It's 11:05. So there have been mixed reports this morning of a potential ceasefire in southern Gaza to coincide with the reopening of the Rafah border crossing.
Yes, meanwhile, speaking to broadcasters on a visit to a Jewish secondary school, the Prime Minister said Israel had a right to defend itself and his people.
I am delighted to say now that we are joined by GB News Home Security Editor Mark White. You were on holiday last week, Mark. We really missed you because you are our expert in this area. This is your first day back at work. Can I just ask you, before you went away on your holiday, in your expert opinion, how was the situation in the Middle East?
It's
relatively quiet.
In that we haven't been reporting on it, but it's always volatile in that region. And if you listen to the Palestinian side, they will tell you that there has been suffering, particularly in Gaza, that has been ongoing for a period of time. Tensions have been stoked. We, of course, have got Israel, which was quite a way through its negotiations with Saudi Arabia to try to implement an agreement with them to have better understanding, cooperation, which would have been very significant, of course, for both parties. So,
why?
Because it would have given Israel some vital friends and allies in the region, or at least a little bit more friendly than they have been. That, of course, is an issue as far as Iran is concerned in terms of the proxies that they have and the concerns that they have about Israel getting any kind of foothold with other Islamic countries in that particular region. It's always an uneasy relationship with all of its neighbours for Israel, but anything that moves them towards having a better relationship is something that a sworn enemy like Iran is always going to be eager to stir up.
Let's go to this morning, 11:08 on Monday morning. Incredibly tense time. We've got Charlie Peters out there and we'll be back to him in just a moment. What do you consider to be the most interesting aspect of this from a security point of view the next stage?
I think what's interesting at the moment is we have not had this ground invasion, this ground war having begun. We've been told that it's been imminent for many days now.
This is Israel, the Israelis into Gaza.
I think it's clear that there is some very significant pressure from allies of Israel trying to ensure that Israel does absolutely everything it can to ensure that as many people as possible are out of harm's way in Gaza and that they move south. But there are enormous complicating factors there as well. You've got a terrorist entity like Hamas in there mixing with the people. They are of the people. So trying to actually establish who is civilian and who is Hamas is enormously difficult at the best of times. So trying to ensure that when people move south, it's not Hamas fighters that are going south as well. And also, you know, you've got pressure, without a doubt, from Hamas on its citizens in Gaza not to head south as well. The IDF have said that they, and indeed they've provided some drone footage that's shown apparent roadblocks on the road south. You've got the other side in Hamas saying, of course, that the IDF have been bombing those convoys heading south. That's something absolutely denied by the IDF.
Mark, we've seen huge amount of support, solidarity from Western governments, not least our own, and the US government to Israel. Very strong allies there. Is there a risk that if the Israeli forces delay their ground assault for longer and longer, that there becomes less of that support for Israel to make that big intervention, to make that invasion, because it's not seen as directly
in retaliation,
if you see what I mean?
Yeah, it's really difficult. I mean, there's pros and cons on both sides. Of course, there is pressure, as I say, clearly from Israel's allies to ensure that, in the words of the US, that and Antony Blinken, that they do the right thing in conducting the next phase of this war and ensure that as many people are out of harm's way as possible. But, of course, as you say, the longer they leave it, then memories, of course, of the absolute horrific events of just 10 days or so ago become diminished. It's the nature of the way that things move on. And the images that preoccupy people now are the images that are coming out of Gaza, showing the horrific suffering of people in Gaza City in particular.
And just in terms, we've had, as we said at the top, lots of mixed reports, conflicting reports about the potential for a brief ceasefire. Those seem to have been completely dashed. The very latest is that the Israeli bombardments are intensifying in Gaza, so no sign of this ceasefire that Egypt was talking about.
Yeah, I mean, certainly we have seen the smoke billowing again from Gaza City this morning, although I think in terms of the intensity, we're not as intense in terms of those aerial bombardments at the moment than we have been in recent days. And it's very difficult, of course, for the IDF at the moment as well to try to ensure that what they're doing is targeting areas that they believe are of significance, in that they are either areas from which these rockets are continuing to be fired from Gaza, or they're tunnels, or they're in some other way connected to Hamas. But in doing that, they are not putting the civilians in needless danger. But how do you do that? I mean, they're so densely packed in there, and although hundreds of thousands, I think the UN was saying this morning, they think about 1 million people may now have moved south, there are still upwards of 500,000 people in and around Gaza City itself.
Where do they go, Mark?
Well, you know, some of them don't want to leave, you know, because they actually do believe that they should stay there, that they should resist. They believe that Hamas is right in what it is doing. Others are unable to leave because they're in hospital, they're elderly and infirm. You know, and others, let's be frank, are being prevented from leaving by Hamas.
OK, Mark White, great to have you back. Thank you so much. Right, we're going to go straight to Tel Aviv now. Charlie Peters is there. Where are you exactly, Charlie, and what's the latest on the ground?
I'm here at the Sheba Medical Center in the east of Tel Aviv, where hundreds have gathered for treatment since last weekend's atrocities in southern Israel. Many soldiers have also been treated here throughout the week, and the injured here really are at the front of the minds of the Israeli population as they consider how the state prepares to strike back on the Hamas terrorist capability within the Gaza Strip. But as the minds here focus on the wounded and the maimed and those who have sadly passed inside this medical facility, there are also significant concerns for the declining humanitarian situation on the Gaza Strip. We've heard in the last half hour from the Egyptian side claiming that the Israelis blocked the opening of the Rafah crossing this morning. That Rafah border crossing between Egypt and Gaza is technically controlled by the Egyptians, and ordinarily they are very limited in who and what can pass through there. But of course that situation is particularly tense at the moment, as the Israelis have ordered 1.1 million people in Gaza City in the north to head south below the Wadi Gaza, that river towards the top third of the strip. They need them to move out before they can continue with their munitions and indeed prepare for that likely ground invasion. But thoughts that invasion will occur soon are dwindling, as there is clearly increased diplomatic pressure from around the world on Israel to show some restraint and allow as many civilians to leave the area as possible. In many ways, this could also benefit the Israelis because, as we've heard in the last week, they are struggling with the logistical supplies to all of their forces, not just the convoy of over 100,000 soldiers that's gathered in the south, but also those reservists and armoured convoys they've sent to the north to reassure and reaffirm the population up there as they continue to fight small skirmishes with Lebanese Hezbollah from southern Lebanon. Those skirmishes have escalated in the last 48 hours, and last night we saw Apache helicopter gunships heading up the coastline to target Hezbollah fighters there, and we've seen footage released by the IDF this morning of missiles launched onto Hezbollah positions. So very much a tense situation here as fears of escalation and the possible involvement of further Iranian proxies and the Iranian state grows.
And Charlie, you've been there for a few days now, about a week. Speaking to Israeli citizens there from all walks of life, I imagine, what is their top concern? Hard to say, of course, but is it the hostages? Is it what Israel decides to do next? What are people telling you?
They want the voices from the atrocities to be heard. That is the priority we hear all of the time. I think they know that attention will start to turn to what's going on in Gaza. We've heard reports of 1,000 people stuck under rubble this morning, nearly 3,000 killed by strikes by Israel, claimed by the Hamas-run health ministry in the Gaza Strip. And I think they are conscious that the global support that poured out for Israel, unprecedented levels of global support for Israel, that was achieved last weekend after those horrifying atrocities reported from the south. They are aware that attention is now shifting to that situation. They still want people to remember what happened here on the 7th of October. They are calling it Black Saturday, the worst attack for many in Israel's history, and certainly the worst violence this country has seen in 50 years. That is their predominant concern, that those voices are not lost as the war escalates and as fears of a wider regional conflict grows.
OK, all right, thank you, Charlie. We'll be back with Charlie a little bit later. Some domestic breaking news now.
Yes, Parliament's independent expert panel has recommended that the Conservative MP, Peter Bone, is suspended for bullying and sexual misconduct.
We will be letting you know the details of that soon. A report by a watchdog said that the MP for Wellingborough committed many varied acts of bullying and one act of sexual misconduct against member of his staff in 2012 and 2013.
Well, there you go. There's that breaking news from closer to home. But still to come, we'll be joined by human rights lawyer Shoaib Khan to discuss the state of our prisons and plans to deport foreign criminals to make space.
It's all a bit bleak, isn't it, really? But anyway, you are with Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
And Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Put your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Very good morning. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Bev Turner and Emily Carver.
It is. Now, we've got quite a few emails coming through this morning. We were talking briefly earlier about the cenotaph and how there were pro-Palestinian protests, flags, etc., right next to it, essentially. And Karen's written in, she says, the staging on the cenotaph is a desecration of the memorial to our war dead. If the demonstrations really must go along, then so be it, but our monument must be protected. So there you go, strong stuff. She says the police have to be proactive. It's only a matter of time until our, she's worried about the Jewish community and so on. So I think a lot of people have those very same thoughts, Karen.
Absolutely. If you were affected at the weekend by London effectively being brought to a standstill from the pro-Palestinian, some of which were pro-Hamas protesters, do get in touch with us. gbviews@gbnews.com is the email address.
Well, this is a problem too, because, of course, the vast majority of people on that protest didn't have any pro-Hamas, paraphernalia. They weren't waving Hamas flags. But there were people within that, unfortunately, making awful chants, images of paragliders on their backs.
Chanting, just awful anti-Semitic chanting on the streets of London.
Yeah, it's not
with no
what you like to
apparent,
see, is it?
Punishment for doing so. Right, keep your emails coming. So Justice Secretary Alex Chalk is set to unveil a series of reforms to sentencing later today here. This includes deporting more foreign prisoners under plans to tackle the prison overcrowding crisis.
Yes, so foreign criminals can be removed up to a year before the end of their sentence. So this will be brought forward by 6 months under the new plans. This is in a move the government claims will save £70,000 per inmate.
Good news, I guess. Joining us now is human rights lawyer Shoaib Khan. Good morning, Shoaib. Good to see you again. Just explain to us how this will change the current system. In what sort of way?
Hi, good morning. Well, to be honest, I mean, it's an announcement by a Tory Justice Secretary, so we're not sure what will actually happen. Will it actually happen? What they're actually going to do? So it's hard to say. But obviously the plan seems to be that finally the Tories, as usual, the last two, have woken up to the fact that our prisons are now full. The party of law and order, the party of lock everyone up for years. And even just a few weeks ago, what we've been hearing from them is, them advising and instructing judges, lock up shoplifters, lock up everyone. And now suddenly they realize, well, there's no space to lock everyone up. And it's costing us hundreds, millions every year, and there's no point doing so. So what will happen essentially, like you said, for now the law says that up to a year before someone completes a sentence in the UK, they can be deported to the country of origin. Now the plan is to bring that 6 months ahead, so that 18 months before someone completes a sentence here, they can be deported.
Why can't we deport someone straight away when they've committed a crime, Shoaib?
Well, that just depends on the criminal justice system. The point is that what we really want. I mean, I guess in a way we can justify that by that, because when we look at what the aims and the targets of the criminal justice system and of prison are, including rehabilitation, including reducing reoffending and so on. But obviously, in all honesty, like we know, and like the Justice Secretary finally admitted today, that's not really happening. No one's being rehabilitated in prison. No one's actually, reducing reoffending. In fact, we send someone to prison once, and then, we find out that's just a spiral, and they're in prison, regularly after that. So from that point of view, yes, I mean...
Sorry to interrupt, Shah, but what about the question Bev asked about deporting foreign criminals? Why isn't this happening? You're a human rights lawyer. Have you ever defended a foreign criminal? Is it a case that their human rights will take primary concern, i.e. if they have family here, or they can make the claim that they would be treated badly in their country of origin? Why are currently so few foreign criminals sent back to their country of origin? Because I'm looking at the statistics here, and it says more than 1 in 9 prisoners, that's 10,500 out of 88,000, are foreign national offenders. A lot of people won't understand why they're in our prisons.
Well, the first thing is, like I was saying, we have to look at what the aims of, theoretically at least, of prison are. So the point is, just because, if someone's committed an offence here, we can't just say, without rehabilitating, without doing anything to them, just send them to another country and that's fine. I think that's actually quite selfish, where we just say, go back home, we don't care who you are, a murderer, rapist, we don't want you in this country, but, go be free in another country. So I think that's quite wrong anyway.
But it's not another country,
secondly,
it's their country of origin, though, isn't it, Shub?
Well, it depends. Many of these people have been in the UK many, many years. Many of them came as children, as toddlers. So it just depends what we say of, their country of origin, what we mean by their country. This is the country that made them what they are. So we do have to take some responsibility for that. Having said that, the reason why there are, and as we've seen, I think the statistics, again, being republished today, in the past 5 years, I think it's fallen by half, the number of foreign criminals being deported. And that's mainly down to, Tory incompetence, and it's hilarious that the Justice Secretary is saying that they want to bring it forward. But the point is, already when they have 3 years, someone's in prison, still, at the very last day, they suddenly wake up the Home Office routinely and then realize, oh, we need to be doing something to deport this person. And then what do? Of course, you're going to have to let them free. So the point is, the Home Office actually needs to start doing these things as soon as someone is sentenced. Realize, okay, this is someone we can potentially deport. Let's start the process.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, that never happens.
But I guess that's what we're agreeing on, is that that's what we want to happen, that if somebody who is not born here, and you say, this country creates these murderers and these rapists, I would very much disagree. I think the individual takes responsibility for their actions to some degree. I understand that people we interviewed a couple of amazing guys earlier that work with people who have been rehabilitated, who've been grown up in poverty and in care, in destitution, and have got in with addictions or the wrong sorts of people. But I do think there is some of this rhetoric around, well, we need to rehabilitate people who have come here, committed an awful crime as a murder or a rape, and then it's our responsibility to rehabilitate that person at great expense to the taxpayer. That's the conversation we should be having, Shoaib, isn't it?
Well, it just depends. I think at some point we need to, stop thinking of ourselves, just as British, just as English, just as the Western world. At some point, at some level, we are all human. The point is, just because someone's
Shoaib, sorry, that is just nonsense. That is just total nonsense. You cannot live with a global justice system. We pay for prisons in this country. That is what our taxpayer money goes to. The question is whether we want that money to be going towards foreign criminals, and I would argue, and I would feel that I'm right on this one, that the vast majority of British people do not want their money to be going towards prison and rehabilitation for foreign criminals.
If the argument we're having is, our prison's far too expensive, then yes, because as the Tories do with everything, there's private contractors, we just give them absolute billions of pounds and get nothing in return.
Yeah,
just Wandsworth prison, the prison that someone just, a prisoner escaped from recently and was recaptured. an independent report after that said, it's inhumane, the conditions in that, it's unsafe. The point is it's unsafe for the staff, it's unsafe for the prisoners. We can't just keep locking people up just to win votes. And I mean, it's good we're finally having this discussion. It took the Tories long enough. But if that's what your point is, let's reduce the people in prison, then I completely agree with that, of course.
OK, thank you. Human rights lawyer Shoaib Khan there. Let us know your thoughts on that.
Got me a little bit riled up there. I don't think we have a responsibility to the world and its criminals. I'm sorry.
Not ready to step quite into this global this new global vision of the world. Yeah, I'm not. I was in South Africa recently, and they had some local, not local newspapers, they had some international newspapers. And I love nothing more than being in a different country and reading international newspapers. And one of the South African newspapers, there was also a Chinese newspaper there. Take that with a pinch of salt. But they were, what they talk about on all of the front pages are global citizens. They see their own communities as global citizens, and that is where we're going. That is the direction of travel.
If you're a global citizen, you are a citizen of nowhere.
That's
right. A dangerous prospect.
It is. Let us know your thoughts, gbviews@gbnews.com. So tonight, the National Jewish Assembly will protest outside the BBC. The NJA says that the BBC have continued their biased and inaccurate coverage of the atrocities committed by Hamas.
And data obtained by GB News shows that since 2012, the number of spiking incidents in Lancashire has increased by almost 200%. We'll bring you that report in just a few moments.
All of that and much more after your morning's news with Tamsin.
Bev, thanks very much. Here are the headlines at 11:31. Egypt is under pressure to open the Rafah crossing on its border with Gaza to allow the safe passage of humanitarian aid, along with the evacuation of foreign nationals from the area. People have been gathering outside the gates after the US confirmed the crossing would be reopened. Here, the Prime Minister will address the escalating crisis this afternoon, as well as the UK's response to the violence. Rishi Sunak says he's working with Israel to minimise the war's impact on civilians.
Israel does have every right to defend itself and its people, to ensure that nothing like this ever happens again. I think that's what the Israeli people would expect from their government, is that if something like this happened here, it's what people would expect from this government, to make sure that they take the proportionate and necessary steps to keep everybody safe. Now, I've raised with the Israeli Prime Minister the need to minimise the impact on civilians best we can. I've raised the humanitarian situation. We will continue to do that with other allies around the region.
Parliament's independent expert panel has recommended that Tory MP Peter Bone be suspended for 6 weeks for bullying and sexual misconduct. A report by the Watchdog says the MP for Wellingborough committed many varied acts of bullying and one act of sexual misconduct against a member of his staff in 2012 and 2013. The MP denies the allegations, calling them factually false. A man once suspected of being part of an Islamic State death squad known as the Beatles has pleaded guilty to terrorism charges. Ain Leslie Davis appeared via video link from Belmarsh Prison and admitted possessing a firearm for terrorism purposes and 2 counts of funding terrorism. His sentencing has been adjourned until next month. Well, you can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Good morning. Still to come, there's been a near 200% increase in drink spiking in Lancashire, and our reporter has been on patrol with the local police force. We're going to bring you that exclusive report with Sophie Reaper in just a moment. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to ordinary people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the live desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
It's 11:37. Loads of emails coming in on that conversation we just had with the human rights lawyer. So do keep your views coming in. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with me, Emily Carver, and Bev Turner.
So data obtained by GB News exclusively shows that since 2012, the number of spiking incidents in Lancashire has increased by almost 200%.
Yes, our North West of England reporter, Sophie Reaper, went out with Lancashire Police on one of their new nighttime operations to see the prevention work they're doing firsthand. She's sent us this exclusive report.
A wet and windy night out in Lancaster. The freshers have returned to university and all seems well. But under the surface, trouble is brewing. GB News has obtained exclusive data which shows in the last decade the number of spiking incidents in Lancashire has skyrocketed by 183%.
We're going out there, we're going to intervene, we're going to stop any offences happening.
Over the past few weeks, Lancashire Police has been carrying out Operation Night Guardian. That's in response to a major increase in the number of violent and sexual offences against women and vulnerable people in the nighttime economy. This man seems to have been causing trouble, and sensing danger, the officers intervene.
We've obviously just seen an incident unfolding there. Tell me what was happening.
Yeah, so at that pub, that gentleman's been banned for something he's done previously. Tonight, he's come down intoxicated and he's tried to get in with his friends. They've let his mates in because they're fine, but they've said to him, well, no, you've caused issues in the past, you're not coming in. And then that's when the problems have started. He's refused to leave the area. We could have arrested him. He was being drunk and disorderly. And the idea of us arresting him for that offence is that we can nip his behaviour in the bud. So he'll spend the night in the cells in our custody to sober up, so he won't be sexually assaulting anyone or causing any fights. That's the way I look at it, as a drunk and disorderly offence. But if he's willing to walk off and have a good night, well then I'm happy because I haven't arrested him, and he's happy because he had a good night.
Things did seem to have calmed down, but within minutes, the same man was placed under arrest.
All over the UK, there are scenes just like this one on a nightly basis. But there's a dark underbelly to Britain's nightlife, and now Lancashire police are fighting back. Tell me why we're in Lancaster tonight.
So we're out for Operation Night Guardian, so we've got officers out in uniform and plain clothes, and we're out there amongst the nighttime economy, speaking with licensees, speaking with the students and the locals that are all out having a good night out, keeping them safe. Violence against women and girls is a national issue. It is an unfortunate statistic that drunken females, vulnerable females, may be attacked, and that generally is by a male perpetrator, and we need to intervene at the right point, identify that predatory, that concerning behaviour that we see out on the streets, and get in there before any offences can happen.
Everyone has the right to get home from a night out safely. And so, moving forward, Lancashire police will be slamming the door shut on anyone who thinks otherwise. Sophie Reaper, GB News.
Good job, Sophie Reaper. We're joined by authors and journalists Nikki Hodgson and Emma Wolfe here. Let's just react to this if we can, Nikki. You'd think, wouldn't you, that an evolving kind of population would see less attacks on women and girls, and yet it's just getting worse. What do we do?
I don't know where we start with misogyny. I think, 15 years ago when I started as a journalist, it was one of my, big areas working on gender stories. I was optimistic about the future of younger men and also all men, actually, being educated that you just don't attack women and you don't rape women and you don't sexually abuse them. But we have got a massive problem in this country because at the minute, obviously, we're hearing about prisons being too full, but, 2% of reported rapes end in conviction. Rape is effectively decriminalised in this country. I found it interesting there that the officer made the point of saying you're vulnerable when you're drunk and you're attacked. Well, the reality is many women are attacked when they're not drunk at all. Being drunk has got nothing to do with it, actually. I appreciate what he was saying. He was saying it from a caring perspective, but actually, most women have experienced some kind of sexual harassment or sexual abuse in their lifetime, and is it this Andrew Tate culture that's infiltrating? What are these men being subjected to?
Well, there's definitely some culture which is clearly infecting these men to think that this is OK. I don't know what that culture is.
Well, I just think, with the online world of so-called masculine influencers, when you watch those videos, they are just horrific.
I don't think it's that.
Well, I personally
think these are gangs who are preying on women who are drunk because they're easy targets and they're using spiking as their method in this way. I doubt these people have any interest in Andrew Tate and what he has to say. I think it's unfortunately a tale as old as time that men will prey on women, and if they're in a vulnerable position, i.e. drunk, and it's easier, isn't it?
There's a few things going on, though. I think that, as Nikki says, the rape conviction levels in this country are shockingly low. But also, what worries me is the amount. It's about 70% of victims drop out during the process because the process of reporting a rape, of going through the investigation with the police, is deeply traumatic. So a lot of people don't get to that stage of conviction and charge and all of that. I think there's also a problem between the genders at the moment. When you watched Angela Rayner and the rage that she was talking about misogyny, making misogyny a hate crime, I think a lot of men, young men, boys, don't know how to have relationships with women. I think that there's, the incel culture, this thing about you need consent to do this, you need consent to do that, you can't ask a woman out, you can't flirt with a woman at work. So I think there's that, and then I think there's the drunken nightlife issue, spiking, that's actually targeting women. But they're all slightly different things, but I don't think the relationships between men and women in this country are in a good state at all.
Yeah, I would agree with that to some extent.
I think the pandemic also increased fear between... I know young people that won't kiss each other because they're still scared of being close. That's young teenage people who grew up during the pandemic, who wore face masks, who were keeping their distance, and that actually really affected a lot of people.
But I don't think it's victim-blaming to talk to young women or girls when they're going out and say, keep your wits about you, cover your glass, stay safe, don't get too drunk, because you are very much weakened when you're drunk, of course you are, and just keep your wits about you. I don't think that's victim-blaming, that's just any advice that any mother or parent would give to their girl.
Well, it's complicated. I mean, I've written about it. I was raped a few years ago by somebody that... No, I talk about it all the time. It's completely fine. Thank you. I was raped by a strange man who was at a work event, who pretended that he knew some people and was like a friend, and then a group of us went to a club, and he got into a taxi that I was going home in and then assaulted me. And the taxi driver, who was male, did nothing. So that was the whole thing. The day after, I didn't know what to do. I was in such a state of, I can't explain what that feels like. And especially when, you know, I'm a feminist, I'm a strong woman, I'm able, I know what the justice system... Happened in the taxi. So a couple of weeks later, I went to the police. And the police were very nice. But they said to me, well, it's been longer than 30 days, so there's no CCTV. Nobody ever talks about that. CCTV is deleted after 30 days. So if you wait longer than that, there'll be no evidence caught on camera. You know, I was in a well-lit place. I was in Chelsea. I'll just tell you the details. I was in, you know, a really nice area. There would have been cameras everywhere. Surely the black cab driver had a camera, but he didn't see fit to do anything to help me. So, and then when the police explained the situation to me, you know, I would have gone to court if I could, and I gave them a description of the man, you know, because he was connected to something I'd been at.
But you didn't know who he was?
I didn't know who he was. I'd met him that evening.
Right.
And he was talking to friends of mine and introduced himself as a friend of a friend.
See.
So he used that as just like, oh, well, you immediately think it's someone's trustworthy, right, just to hang out with. I mean, I'm now married, but I was with my husband then. He was my boyfriend, and he was away. And the feeling, I was so afraid to tell him what had happened because I thought, and I know it's so wrong, I thought he would think I was trying it on or I invited it.
Well, you were in the back of a taxi with him. How, you know...
But, I mean, the point being, I literally called a cab myself, got in, gave my address, and the guy got in the other side. And I was very drunk. And I'll be honest, so therefore I was like, in my head I thought, oh, is he just getting a lift somewhere or something? It didn't...
You were drunk?
I was drunk, yeah.
Which is not a crime.
No, which is completely not a crime. No. But I'm just trying to explain, this is... The reality is, even when you know what your rights are, you feel like you're able to report it, the police just can't help. They couldn't find this guy. I gave them a description, I told them so many things that he told me that night.
Could you not find out who he was through friends and colleagues at the event?
Well, no, because the person... He did a very clever thing, that he introduced himself to a chain of people, so therefore... It seemed like he was known, but actually he wasn't. Well, and that was the problem.
He sounds like the most awful predator. Doing that, coming up with a story, trying to, you know... Oh, I'm so sorry that happened.
And that person should not be walking on the streets.
Well, no, and that was, you know, and I had to live with that, thinking, if I can't get him, so to speak, and then go...
Just to make the point, you are a sort of prominent feminist, you've written about this, you've researched about this. Imagine that you're 15 years old and you're drunk and you're not even sure of what your rights are or whether you did the wrong thing.
And you know what, Nikki, there might be people watching and listening to this who say, that same guy has done that same act to me in that same area, so,
But also, let's remember that many, many rapes happen within the context of relationships by abusive partners. And then that's a whole other minefield because you're too frightened to go to the police or whatever.
Should we talk about migration? So, studies, figures now suggesting that migration to the UK will not fall below £250,000 to £350,000 a year for the rest of the decade. This is according to predictions from the Migration Observatory. I mean, the first question that Emily had about this morning, Emma, was, well, how can they possibly know?
How can they possibly know?
Well, I guess this is without a change in policy, this is what we're looking at.
So this is from the Migration Observatory at Oxford University and the LSE. But it's heavily caveated. It's in The Guardian. It's heavily caveated because these are just predictions. Who could have known? OK, 2019, migration was around 219,000. Who would have predicted that by 2023 it would be over 600,000? Really?
And that's net?
Net, yeah. Really, predicting migration figures is a bit of a mug's game. We didn't know about the pandemic. We didn't know what was coming down the line with Ukraine, necessarily. We didn't know... There are so many factors. The employment situation, how many visas you hand out. There are so many factors here that will affect the migration figures.
Nikki, are you relaxed about these figures, not dropping below 250 to 350,000 people a year? I mean, we were promised not that long ago, tens of thousands.
Well, I'm married to an immigrant. I know my family are immigrants, and actually my mum and my brother are immigrants in Australia.
Doesn't mean you have to be, you know, relaxed about these figures, though.
No, of course not. I'm setting the context. I think it's important because we have, 40,000 nursing vacancies, for example, in this country. Now, our intention is to train staff here and reintroduce bursaries and all the rest of it. But in the interim, where we need care for patients who will die without that care, we need people to do those jobs. And quite recently, Rishi Sunak went to India to do a trade deal, which we have to do because we voted for Brexit. And the offer made to Rishi Sunak was, well, we'll do this trade deal with you if you give us some work visas for nurses, for medical staff. And Rishi Sunak said no. So from my perspective, everything is so back to front with immigration. The majority, actually, of these numbers, according to the Observatory, is that they are from work visas and foreign students. Foreign students prop up our universities because we don't fund our universities properly. If we get rid of foreign students, then what happens to British students? They won't be able to afford to go to university because the business model of that is so broken. We've got short-term crises around where we need immigrants. We need skilled and unskilled immigrants to work and to help and to pay into the system.
But Emma, also the other issue, when you talk about we need immigrants to fill these work shortages, we've got millions of people on out-of-work benefits. What should the government be focusing on?
And what about the foreign criminals in our jails? I really enjoyed your discussion a little bit earlier on about putting prisoners to work. I know this is a slightly different point, but in America you see sort of chain gangs, basically, on the road, mending the road, fixing potholes, doing all sorts of work. Why do we have prisoners sitting in prisons, costing lots of money, learning about drugs, becoming more and more and more criminal? Why are they not out working, doing helpful things? I'm not suggesting putting them in our hospitals and asking them to be nurses and doctors, but why are we not using prisons as a place for rehabilitation, but also public work?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think you're right on that.
I think, but it seems, Nikki, that in terms of these migration figures, somehow we should be able to handpick particularly the services that we need, the skills that we need, rather than just arbitrary, as long as you earn over £25,000 a year, you can come here.
But this is what I'm saying about Rishi Sunak and where I think he's really gone wrong with this India deal, because he was offered something that we absolutely need that would have benefited both countries.
Why do you think he
refused
accept it?
Because he's afraid of the figures going up and it's just a political...
But hang on,
it's just a political movement.
We've already given a record number of visas to Indian citizens, so it's not exactly like we're closing the door on India when it comes to visas. I think they're our highest
we have a desperate need for 40,000 nurses. We had those nurses on offer to us and we declined it. That's stupid, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, it wouldn't be very good for the Indian people, though, would it?
Well,
to steal their nurses and doctors,
which is what we've been doing for 20 years.
Yeah, of course. I know we have. Yes, I know we have. But
how would you
worth thinking about? Worth thinking about. Should we move on? Shall we move on to? We'll come to that point on the foreign prisoners because we did have quite a heated conversation with the human rights lawyer, and he did make a point. That is actually a fair enough point, that prisoners, people who commit crimes, whether they're foreign or not, in this country, perhaps should serve out their sentence here. What do you think to that?
No, I think it's absolutely outrageous. I don't know why we haven't been doing this all along. The minute a foreign criminal commits a crime in our country, the minute they break our laws, they are here at our behest. They should be deported to their country of origin. It's not sending them somewhere else. No, it's not. It's returning them to their country of origin. Last year, we removed just over 3,000 foreign criminals, but we still have 10,500 foreign criminals in England and Wales, in our prisons. And I think that's absolutely outrageous. We're not only giving them prison space when we don't have any prison space, and we are desperately running out, but we're also looking after them.
Right, well, I think that's all we've got time for. Sorry, Nikki, I would come to you on that one, but we've spoken immigration and other topics, because up next it is the Live Desk with Mark Longhurst and Pip Thompson. So what's coming up on today's programme, Mark?
Well, of course, it is a rapidly changing situation in the Middle East, so we'll try and keep you up to speed. First, the confusion over the crossing, these conflicting reports as to whether a deal has been struck to allow that humanitarian corridor through the key Rafah gateway with Egypt. 600,000, of course, on the move. Also, the IDF saying 199 people are being held hostage in Gaza after being taken by Hamas, with any negotiations seemingly out of the question. How do their forces launch a rescue in such perilous circumstances? And, of course, the last-minute shuttle diplomacy. Antony Blinken back in Tel Aviv after visiting Egypt in Cairo. What chance will there be of doing a deal before hostilities start? We'll have all that coming up for you at the top of the hour at 12 noon. Stay with us on the Live Desk.
Thank you very much. Time for a couple of your emails. I think this morning Alison has said you are absolutely correct. I, for one, don't think we should be paying for foreign criminals. They should be deported ASAP, returns agreements or not, and no matter how much the sentence they have served.
Yeah, others have got in touch to say that no, they should see out their sentence in this country before they're then deported. But alas, we've come to the end of our show, Bev.
Shame. It's been lovely.
It has been lovely.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Nikki, and also Emma. As we say, Pip and Mark will be back, but this is Britain's Newsroom. We're back tomorrow morning at 9:30. You are with GB News, the People's Channel. Have a great day.
Hello, I'm Alex Deakin. This is your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. A fine start to the working week, although it's a bit chilly out there today. However, later this week, some very heavy rain and some strong winds, courtesy of this area of low pressure. But before it arrives, we have high pressure sitting over us, bringing, as I say, a fine day for most. Bit chilly out there, small chance of 1 or 2 showers, maybe along the Kent coast and across into Shetland, perhaps into southwest Scotland. But for the majority, dry and fine, hazy sunshine. The breeze picking up a little in the southwest, making it feel pretty fresh here, and generally temperatures are below average for the time of year, only struggling up into the low teens at best across the south. So a chilly feel, and temperatures will fall away again this evening, particularly with some clearer skies over northern England, southern Scotland and Northern Ireland. A bit more cloud across the south, the breeze continuing to strengthen, and just the threat of a little bit of rain just pushing up into the far southwest, and still a few showers over Shetland. But for most, a dry night, and with the clearer skies across Scotland, Northern England, Northern Ireland, some pockets of frost are likely here. But again, a fine start to Tuesday with quite a bit of sunshine, quite a bit more cloud across the south, though thickening up all the while with some showery rain, perhaps across parts of Devon, Cornwall, maybe into Pembrokeshire later on. And by the end of the day, that rain will be working into Northern Ireland. Again, for most, it's dry and reasonably bright, but still a fairly chilly feel with temperatures 11 to 14 degrees. Goodbye.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best.
Bellissima.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you. My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another.